Let's bring up our next guest, Rachel Hill. Rachel, how's it going?
Great.
Nice to
How are
see you.
Nice to see you.
Rachel, running for judge.
Yes, I
am.
am.
How's things going with that?
Well, I think pretty well. It's hard to gauge, but I think they're going quite well. And the only thing is I can tell you is I am chronically sleep deprived right now. So if I stop making sense, I may just slap myself and try to reboot.
For the people out there that haven't
yes,
met,
you are.
Yeah, for the people out there that haven't met Rachel Hill before, let's go back a little bit. Where'd you grow up at?
I grew up on Long Island, Huntington, New York.
Wow, what brought you to California?
Well, actually, the firm McCormick Barstow, they interviewed out at Notre Dame Law School in 1989 and brought me back. But I decided to accept the position because actually the person I was dating and hoping to marry at the time thought Fresno State was his best shot at a job. So I accepted the job.
And did you finally close that deal?
Well, actually, I believe he's teaching in a university in upstate New York.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, he never moved out here, actually.
All right, so you go from Long Island,
yes.
You come all the way to Fresno.
Yes.
And you're like, hey, man, I hit the jackpot. I'm coming to California.
Exactly.
Fresno,
That's exactly
right? So you come here, and what type of law do you practice?
Primarily criminal law now, and I also teach at the law school. I teach juvenile justice. They asked me to develop a program, a course in juvenile justice and criminal law. But I also practiced civil law for 5 years.
So, criminal law.
Yes.
Now, and you want to. Now you're representing the people that are accused of crimes.
Right, and I've been a prosecutor as well. I was with the district attorney's office for 10 years. Actually, I loved that job.
So you've seen both sides.
Yes.
So, but now you're going into the judge's seat,
right.
And it's kind of play in the middle of those two, but with a heavier hand.
Absolutely. And the thing that's important, I think, is for a judge to have perspective, to listen carefully to both sides, and to make a judgment call not based upon bias toward one side or the other, but based upon the evidence that's before them.
And I've talked to you before about this, Rachel, and this is why I love to have you on. In my opinion, and I'll say it's my opinion, that the judges that I've seen recently, and not myself before them, but that I've seen that the judges might be not looking at the whole picture. That there might be a youngster in front of them that's made a bad mistake, and maybe prison isn't the greatest option. Maybe we send that young kid as a minor criminal to prison, and he comes out a much bigger criminal, and maybe there's other ways to set down these judicial ways of yours.
Right, absolutely. Each case you have to look at carefully on a case-by-case basis. You have to look at the severity of the crime. You have to look at the danger to the community. You also have to look at what is the most viable option and the most appropriate option in order to keep this kind of criminal activity from continuing. And in the juvenile justice field, actually, we have a lot of information now about things that work other than incarceration, and actually much more effectively than incarceration for a lot of your lower level offenders, particularly some low level property crimes such as vandalism, graffiti, that kind of thing.
Right.
There's a program called the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program. It's part of this restorative justice program that they've actually implemented over the last 30 years, and now we have a lot of statistics on it. So we know that a juvenile who is charged with a particular crime, if they participate in the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program versus one who's merely incarcerated for the exact same offense, the recidivism rates are 5 times lower for those that participate in victim offender reconciliation.
So they're taking the child, really,
Right.
and having him meet the person that he's hurt.
Right, and it's always voluntary on the part of the victim. So victims never have to participate. If a victim does not want to be involved, they do not have to be involved at all. But if they do, and if the juvenile has indicated that they have remorse, that they are willing to make restitution, that they are willing to jump through quite a few hoops, actually, there is a meeting that is facilitated through probation. And then the victim actually feels quite empowered because they get the opportunity to talk to the juvenile and say, "This is how your conduct has affected me." And actually,
Pretty powerful, I'd imagine, right?
It's incredibly powerful because what you see is you see true remorse developing in the face of the juvenile who very often really had no frame of reference for how significantly he or she may have impacted the victim's life. And so when the victim tells the story and personalizes it to the perpetrator, it changes their whole frame of reference, the punishment that they get, and it's not like they're just slapped on the wrist and all they have to do is say, "I'm sorry." That's definitely not the end of it. There is direct accountability for their conduct, but it is not so removed from the conduct that the kid, if you just send them to juvenile hall for a couple weeks or a month for, a low-level offense, they come out just a little bit more pissed off, a little more alienated than they were, and
or
probably,
educated.
well, and I was going
Yeah.
to say, and probably with a few new skill sets that are not ones that you would want them to have.
Well, talking to skill sets,
Yes.
I got to say that with our county jail,
Yes.
just busting at the seams
Yes.
all the time, and things like the city owning eyesore like Granite Park, can't we just put him to work over there? Can't we clean it up?
Well, there is something called the Adult Offender Work Program, which is an alternative in certain types of offenses. It's an alternative to a certain amount of time
Well,
in
I'm talking
custody.
about the ones we're feeding and housing,
housing,
all the
right.
time, not the
Well-
ones that are on the outside trying to do their civil duty.
Right.
But I'm talking about the ones that are on the inside. They're sitting there on their butts all day long. And I'm
okay.
sorry, guys, that you're watching down there at the jail. But wouldn't you like to get out and get some fresh air? Right?
Yeah.
I'll bet you quite a few would.
I'm sure they would. Now, you're in a runoff.
Yes.
And it's November
4th.
that
Yes.
we're coming up on
Yeah.
this. Your opponent, why should it be Rachel Hill and not your opponent?
Well, I think that my opponent, who is a very good prosecutor, she's got a very strong skill set. She's been prosecuting homicide cases. She had been for years. She hasn't. I think she's prosecuted one in the last 8 or 10 years, but I think that's because she moved into administration, and so she's dealing largely with personnel issues and those things. But she is quite skilled at homicide cases, absolutely. But what comes before a judge is a lot. Homicide cases are just a very, very small proportion of those.
Thank goodness.
And yes, exactly. She and I have very different philosophies as to what is appropriate. And we've spoken at different candidate forums in the past, and she has articulated her position quite effectively. What she thinks will work in terms of jail overcrowding, to me, is a little too simplistic and is basically intimating that nobody else works hard, and that if you just say work harder, work faster, and I hold the attorneys accountable to be ready, then you'll get rid of the jail overcrowding. And while it's true that about 75% of the inmates at any given time in the jail are predisposition, meaning they have yet to be processed through the criminal justice system, a huge portion of that problem is not funding the various offices appropriately. And in fact, the new district attorney-elect, Lisa Smitkamp, in her campaign ran very much on that issue. She mentioned how woefully underfunded the public defender's office is, also the DA's office. And the public defenders have 4 times the caseload as is recommended by national standards, 4 times the felony caseload per person. So if, as a judge, if you just said, well, I'm sorry, counsel, you didn't show good cause for a continuance, you didn't file a written motion, proceed anyway, because that's your philosophy, is I'm just going to hold you accountable and say you need to be ready. They have more than can be done. And if you push that forward anyway as the judge, and if the prosecutor by some miracle still gets their conviction, it is very likely to be overturned on appeal for having inadequately prepared counsel, because that's a constitutional right. A judge can't change that fact. So what would happen is that case would have to be retried probably a couple years later. You're wasting a tremendous amount of time and resources and money. People are coming out of their homes to retry the case, to be jurors. Victims have to come back on the stand and testify again. Witnesses have to testify again, often years later when their memories fade. It's a lot harder to get the conviction the second time around. It makes a lot more sense to do it right the first time. And the court system is almost like a plumbing system, and you have a massive clog in one section. And that's because we're just not funding certain areas of the court, including the district attorney's office.
Are the funds there?
Well, it's up to the Board of Supervisors as to how they want to allocate the funds, but
they're there.
But they're there, and it is essential that you don't just fund one aspect of it, because you then get this tremendous clog in this one area, and nothing can proceed in a way that is at least likely to stand. And so you're gonna exacerbate the jail overcrowding problem if that's how you pursue it. What you need to do as a judge to deal with jail overcrowding, and it's limited what one judge can do in that regard, but you have a big impact, particularly if you're in a home court, which handles the majority of the felonies, is you need to look and triage your cases and figure out which cases require immediate incarceration and which ones would the community be better served if you looked at alternatives that have proven to work. We're not talking about rolling the dice and just saying, well, let's give them a deal because the jail's full. It's looking at what has proven to work and what is likely to result in less future criminal activity, not more. So it protects the community because you're dealing with the root causes of the problem. And so then the person is less likely to come back, reoffend, and very often if someone reoffends, even for a low-level offense, a low-level drug offense, if you never deal with the root cause of the problem, they keep coming back, and then you're spending a lot more money, and very often they graduate to more serious crime to support the drug habit.
Right. Okay. All right, before we go, one last question. Rachel, do you vote?
Yes, I do vote.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
So Rachel Hill, everybody, on November 4th, running for a judge. Rachel, thank you very much for coming by.
Thank you so much.
Always so good to see you.
You too. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back on The Buzz. Stick around.